There was something in that moment you couldn't name. Maybe it was a message you reread 3 times before answering. Maybe it was an invitation that seemed right in every way, the words, the timing, the proposal, but left something inside you too quiet, not at peace. Quiet. Like part of you was waiting to see what would happen next. Maybe it was someone who came back after a long absence, someone who arrived with beautiful apologies, a renewed story, a newer version of themselves. And you wanted to believe them. Part of you really did. But there was something, a hesitation you couldn't explain and no one around you seemed to understand, that made you pause. And the moment you paused, someone said, "You're afraid," or "You're being negative," or "You're being difficult," or the cruelest version of all, "You're letting your past control your present." And maybe you believed that because you didn't want to be that person, the one who never trusts, the one who always sees danger where there isn't any, the one who lets old wounds close doors that God was already opening. So you moved forward, but that hesitation, you never fully forgot it. You're here now because there's a question you never quite put into words, but have been carrying for far too long. What if what you called fear was actually wisdom trying to be heard? If you're not subscribed to this channel yet, do that now, because what we build here isn't hype. It's clarity. It's exactly what you need in this season. Leave a like too. That simple gesture helps this content reach the people who need it most. But before we continue, because what you're about to hear is going to touch something you've been carrying for a long time without a name for it. You survived, but surviving isn't the same as living, and you know that. You feel it in the quiet moments. You feel it in the space between who you are and who you know you were called to be. This material is called The Total Transformation of the Chosen, and it exists to close that gap. 5 modules, a 30-day plan, 50 declarations, 2 exclusive bonuses. Everything in PDF, delivered to your email in less than 5 minutes. Not to give you more information, but to give you the system that transforms everything you've been through into the greatest weapon of your mission. Whoever walked through the fire and is still standing doesn't need motivation. They need structure. This material is that structure. I've made a limited number of copies available in the first pinned comment below, but move quickly. There are very few units left, and this could come down at any moment. Get yours right now before it closes. There's a difference between fear and wisdom that most people never learn to distinguish, not because it's complicated, but because they were taught repeatedly to distrust themselves before distrusting the situation. And that's the damage no one talks about, not the damage of the betrayal itself. It's what comes after. When you start questioning whether what you felt was real, whether your perception was trustworthy, whether your internal no had any value at all. Because when someone manipulates you with enough skill, the most devastating thing they do isn't hurt you. It's teach you to doubt yourself. And you learned that lesson, perhaps too well. You learned to reinterpret discomfort as weakness. You learned to call your questions paranoia. You learned that needing more time was your problem, not a reasonable response to something that deserved attention. You learned that sensing something wrong in a person was judgment, and that judgment was sin. You learned that saying no was selfishness, that protecting your space was isolation, that hesitating was a lack of faith. And through all of that, you didn't necessarily lose your discernment. You lost permission to trust it. That's different. That's an important difference because the discernment was still there. It still is. But it got buried under layers of shame, guilt, and spiritual confusion, and under the voice of people who benefited from the fact that you didn't trust yourself. Let me give you some concrete scenes. You're rereading a message late at night. It's from someone you wished were different from what they appear to be. The words are right. The tone is right. But there's something, a pattern that surfaces when you lay the conversations side by side, that doesn't add up. You try to explain it away. You create context. You wonder if you're manufacturing problems where none exist. And then you respond. Because the alternative felt selfish. Or you agree to something and in the very next second feel that immediate drain. Not tiredness, drainage. That specific feeling that some part of you went somewhere it shouldn't have gone. Or You're explaining the same boundary for the fifth time to the same person, and you realize you're no longer waiting to be understood. You're waiting for them to stop needing you to abandon the boundary so the relationship can function. Or someone apologizes beautifully, genuinely even, with tears and the right words. And 3 weeks later, the same behavior begins again, slightly different but recognizable. And you ask yourself, am I someone who doesn't know how to forgive? Am I someone who doesn't give enough chances? No. You know how to forgive. What you are learning, what this season is actually teaching you, is that forgiveness and access are not the same thing, that a beautiful apology is not evidence of real change, that you can release someone from your heart without reopening the door of your life to them. But there's a question that needs an honest answer. How do you know when what you're feeling is wisdom and when it's simply the wound speaking? That's the question most content avoids answering, and it's the most important one. Because there's a second extreme, and it's just as dangerous as the first. Some people have been hurt so many times that they've started treating every uncomfortable feeling as a divine warning. Every relationship that requires effort becomes manipulation. Every opportunity that demands courage becomes a trap. Every person who draws close becomes a suspect. And that isn't discernment. That's trauma impersonating wisdom. So you can't simply choose a side. You can't say, I trust everything I feel, or I trust nothing I feel. You need something more precise than that. You need tests. A spiritually mature person, before deciding what a feeling means, does something specific. They examine it, not suppress it, not dramatize it. They examine it, carefully, prayerfully, with time, and with attention to what the facts are actually saying. And the first thing a discerning person examines is urgency. Think of a situation, any situation, an invitation, a proposal, a relationship asking for an answer right now. And imagine you say, I need more time to think about this. What happens if the situation is healthy, if the opportunity is genuine, if the person is truly who they say they are? Something specific follows. They might be disappointed, they might even be frustrated, but they will respect that you need time, because a real offer doesn't disappear because you slept on it. A person of integrity may not like your boundary, but they won't use that boundary against your ability to think clearly. Now, what happens when the urgency isn't genuine? The pressure increases, the timeline shrinks, the stakes suddenly grow larger, scarcity appears, the closing window, the opportunity that only exists right now, today, in this exact moment. And if you don't decide immediately, you'll lose everything. What that urgency is actually doing is replacing your judgment with someone else's enthusiasm. It's making your decision before you have enough information to know whether you should even be deciding. It doesn't have to be malicious manipulation. Sometimes it's just someone so convinced of what they want that they can't wait for you to reach your own conclusion. But the result is the same. Maturity says, I don't have enough clarity yet to answer. Sometimes not yet is the wisest response you can give. And if the situation can't survive your not yet, that information is more valuable than any answer you could have given in that pressured moment. The second thing a discerning person examines is the pattern, and this requires real honesty. Because our minds are extraordinarily good at creating context for whatever we want to be true, especially when something matters to us deeply. When someone matters to us, we find explanations. We build narratives. We remember the good moments with more clarity than the inconsistent ones. We justify the contradictions with the complexity of human nature, and all of that can be real. People are complex. Context matters. Grace is necessary. But there is a fundamental difference between being gracious towards someone and being blind to a pattern. A single strange moment is not a pattern. One difficult conversation doesn't define a person. A bad day is not a revelation of character. But when the same thing happens repeatedly, when the same boundary is crossed after the same apologies, when the same behavior returns after the same remorse, when the same word is broken after the same promise, that is no longer a moment. That is a pattern. And a pattern is information. Wisdom notices the pattern that excitement keeps trying to excuse. Wisdom asks, what keeps happening? Not what happened once, not what you imagine might happen. What keeps happening over and over, even after conversations, even after boundaries, even after new attempts? Is someone warm when they want access and cold when they don't? Does an opportunity keep asking you to compromise something you prayed to protect? Do the words and the actions keep pointing in different directions? That's the pattern speaking. And a pattern is evidence, not that everyone is evil, not that no one changes, but that what you keep seeing is probably what is actually there. Look at a relationship that seems promising. The conversations are good. The connection feels real. But something keeps repeating. Every time you express a need, the subject changes. Every time you ask for clarity about what exists between you, the answer stays vague. Every time you begin to feel secure, something happens that puts you right back in uncertainty. You want to believe the best. You want to give the benefit of the doubt. But notice the pattern, not what you wish it were, what keeps happening. A person who genuinely values what you have won't need to create enough confusion that you can't tell where you're standing. They won't leave you feeling like you're too much every time you ask for something basic. That's not an accusation. It's an observation. And wisdom is exactly that. The willingness to observe what is actually happening instead of replacing reality with the narrative you'd prefer to be true. Or think of an impressive opportunity. Solid proposal, convincing person, timing that seems perfect. Something feels right about almost everything. Except one thing you can't set aside, something that will eventually be required of you. A point where, if you trace what this opportunity truly costs, you'll arrive somewhere you'll need to compromise something you're not willing to compromise. It's not necessarily a trap. But wisdom is asking, what is this going to cost that hasn't been named yet? That question deserves an answer before any decision is made. And what about someone from your past who has returned? Someone who knows your history, who knows how to reach you, who brings back that version of themselves that you loved and makes you want to believe things could really be different this time. Sometimes they can be. Sometimes people genuinely change. But the right question isn't, is this person capable of changing? The right question is, has this person changed? And the answer isn't found in the narrative they bring with them. It's found in the pattern they demonstrate across time, consistency, actions that match words. Boundaries respected without needing to be defended repeatedly. That's what reveals real change. You don't need to be cruel to be careful. You don't need to close your heart to open your eyes. There are still 2 deeper examinations ahead. Because urgency and pattern are only the beginning. The next 2 tests, the test of fruit and the test of integrity, are the ones that reach where the others can't. One will ask you to look at what is being produced over time, not what was promised, not what appears on the surface, but what remains after the excitement is gone. The other will ask you to answer the most honest question that exists. What would I have to betray inside myself in order to say yes to this? That's where we go next. The third thing wisdom examines is fruit, not charisma, not chemistry, not how someone makes you feel in your best moments together, not their spiritual vocabulary or the confidence in their promises. Fruit. Jesus said it plainly in Matthew 7. A tree is known by its fruit, not by how tall it stands, not by how beautiful it looks in the right season, by what it consistently produces. So the question isn't, does this person seem good? Does this opportunity feel right? Does this relationship have potential? The question is, what does this actually produce in my life over time? More honesty or more performance? More stability or constant confusion? More courage or growing? Dependency? More clarity or lines that keep shifting? More peace or a slow, quiet self-betrayal you keep finding new explanations for? What remains when the excitement disappears? What's left on an ordinary Tuesday when there's no emotion carrying you forward, and you have to look at what's actually there? Fruit reveals what appearance can hide, and fruit takes time to see. That's exactly why wisdom asks you to slow down long enough to look. The fourth thing is integrity, but not theirs, yours. Ask yourself honestly, and let the question settle before you answer it. What would I have to betray inside myself in order to say yes to this? Sometimes the warning isn't predicting catastrophe. Sometimes the person isn't dangerous and the opportunity isn't a scheme. Sometimes nothing dramatic will happen at all. But if staying in that relationship, in that opportunity, in that conversation, requires you to repeatedly silence a clear conviction, abandon a boundary you set for a real reason, or look away from something you already know is true, then wisdom is showing you the price. And the price is worth knowing before you pay it. Keep this nuanced. Not everyone who causes discomfort is a threat. Not every misalignment is malice. A mature person can recognize that something isn't right for them without needing to assign blame or declare war. You can step back without making everyone who stayed behind an enemy. But you can only do that if you trust yourself enough to listen to what you sense. Now, honesty requires something harder. Sometimes what you're feeling really is fear. Not wisdom, not discernment, just fear. Old wounds trained to see danger in anything unfamiliar. A nervous system still calibrated for environments that no longer exist. An internal alarm so long on high alert that it fires even when the room is genuinely safe. Sometimes peace feels suspicious because chaos used to feel like home. Sometimes a stable, consistent person feels wrong because you're used to instability keeping you activated. Sometimes growth feels threatening because growth costs something, and you've been exhausted for a long time. This matters because if you treat every uncomfortable feeling as a divine warning, you won't protect yourself. You'll only withdraw from everything. And isolation dressed in spiritual language is still isolation. 1 John 4:1 gives a direct instruction: test the spirits, not worship them, not automatically obey every internal sensation. Test them. Faith does not require gullibility. Spiritual maturity isn't the ability to feel things deeply. It's the willingness to examine what you feel against time, against fruit, against pattern, against evidence, and against what you genuinely know to be true. James writes that wisdom from above is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits. Notice what it does not do. It does not demand secrecy. It does not collapse under honest examination. It does not need you to act before you think. It does not ask you to become smaller in order to receive it. True wisdom can survive being tested. If something needs you to stop asking questions in order to stay, if it needs your silence more than your clarity, what you're being asked to protect isn't wisdom. And here is the wound underneath all of this that rarely gets named clearly enough. Most people aren't afraid of making the wrong decision. They are afraid of being blamed for making the decision that protects their peace. They've been taught that no requires a courtroom-ready defense. That a boundary needs unanimous approval before it counts. That taking time means lacking faith. That needing space means being unforgiving. That protecting themselves means closing the door on everything God had for them. So they overrode themselves again and again, not because they couldn't sense the warning, but because they had been made to feel that the cost of listening to it was too high. You said yes when something inside said not yet. You stayed when something kept asking you to look again. You explained yourself to people who were never really listening. You made yourself smaller, quieter, more available, because you were afraid that protecting yourself was the same as losing your destiny. But here is what is true. What is genuinely aligned with who you are does not require you to silence every honest question just to keep it. A pause is information. A boundary is information. Someone's reaction to your boundary is information. Time reveals. Patterns reveal. Fruit reveals. You don't need paranoia. You need attention. If you've made it this far, something in you is already shifting. You're learning to pause before you decide. And that changes everything. The material in the first pinned comment was built for exactly this season you're walking through. The total transformation of the chosen. Go get yours right now and drop a comment below. Tell me what this is opening up in you. So when that quiet hesitation arrives and you don't know what to do with it, here's what a discerning person actually does. They don't immediately run. They don't immediately override themselves either. They pause, they pray honestly, not only for the answer they already want, but for the clarity they actually need. They write down what actually happened, separating fact from imagined outcome. They look for repetition. They examine the fruit. They ask whether saying yes would require betraying something they already know to be true. If possible, they seek one grounded, trustworthy voice, someone who doesn't personally benefit from their decision either way. And they allow enough time for artificial urgency to lose its power. Because urgency that's manufactured always fades, and what remains after it fades is usually what the situation actually was from the very beginning. Now return to where we started, that moment. The hesitation you couldn't name. Wisdom may have been protecting you through ordinary moments you nearly missed entirely. The message you didn't send that night. The extra day you gave yourself before answering. The invitation you stopped chasing. The boundary you finally stopped over-explaining. The opportunity you allowed yourself to investigate before accepting. The relationship where the words kept sounding right, but the fruit kept saying something different. Nothing dramatic. No intervention you could point to or prove. Just a quiet pause that you finally decided to honor. Here is the shift worth carrying into every season ahead. The goal is not to become more guarded. The goal is to become more trustworthy to yourself, under God. A wall and a gate are not the same thing. A wall keeps everything out without distinction. A gate decides what belongs inside. Healing doesn't require you to wall off your heart. It requires a gate strong enough to discern what deserves to enter, and grounded enough to open for what genuinely does. You don't need to call every hesitation fear. You don't need to call every hesitation God. You can pause. You can pray. You can test. You can observe. You can ask honest questions, examine the fruit, and take the time that real clarity requires. And you can make a grounded, peaceful decision without abandoning yourself to reach it. This is the season where urgency stops making your decisions, where patterns matter more than promises, where fruit outlasts first impressions, where peace becomes your signal and integrity becomes your standard. You are not paranoid for noticing. You are not faithless for pausing. You are not selfish for protecting what God placed in your care. You are learning to be someone you can trust, and that is one of the most sacred things a person can become. If this is the season where you stop allowing urgency to make your decisions, write in the comments, "I choose wisdom over urgency." That quiet warning wasn't asking you to run. It was asking you to slow down long enough to see, and wisdom only speaks that softly to someone patient enough to listen. Leave a like, drop something in the comments, and if you're ready to go deeper, everything you need is in the first pinned comment below. The next video is already on your screen. I'll see you there.